Hello, and welcome back to the Dobber Prospects ranking meeting. This is our midterm February ranking, and it is going to be a top 64 plus honorable mentions. We have a pretty full cast today with myself, Sebastian, and Hadi Kalakeche, who is our Director of North American Scouting, Luke Sweeney, who is our WHL Scout, Annie Karvinen, who is covering Finland and Central Europe, David Saad, who is our USA Scouting Maestro, Sasha Lagarde is covering the QMJHL. Jordan Harris is with the OHL. Graham is covering Russia, and Colin Hunter is our resident goalie scout. We are missing a few people, but almost everyone was able to make it for this meeting, which is always very exciting. And let us get this underway with first overall. I assume we're not going to have a particularly long debate in this slot, but if anyone has a single word to say other than Macklin Celebrini, now is the time.
Well, that single word is no. So I think we're.
I was going to say next, but yeah, sure, that works too.
Yeah, that works too.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Macklin Celebrini, I think, is just the most dynamic and projectable player in this draft class, and it's not particularly close.
Oh, for sure.
Just a really, really special talent that every single organization in the NHL would be clawing to add to their cupboards. So he's a very easy player to slot in at first overall on our midterm board. Second overall is where it opens up a little bit. I think a lot of us have a tier that ranges from second overall all the way down to like seventh or eighth. But I know the player that I have here, I know that he's also the player that Hadi has here, would be Ivan Demidov, who is probably unrivaled in this draft class in terms of raw skill and ability. And I know with dynamism, there might be a slight argument with Berkeley Catton in here. And I know Luke Sweeney does have Berkeley Catton's range going up to 2. Is this an argument for people? Because I have not seen enough of Catton to quite rival Demidov in my viewings.
It's an argument for me. I think there's few players in the WHL that have the kind of ability that Catton does that also have to do as much with as little supporting cast around them. Berkeley Catton has not very much help. The second best player on his team is Connor Roulette, and he's a good player, but he is all over the ice every night. He is a beautiful skater, an amazing passer. He's got a great shot to boot. For me, he is number 2. That's only because I have some qualms with Ivan Demidov. I mean, I think he tries to do a little bit too much sometimes, and I think Catton is just a phenomenal player. He's a wizard with the puck on his stick. He's always finding routes to get himself the puck when he doesn't have it himself. Like we talked about before, I could go on and on and on about Berkeley Catton. He is amazing. I think that if I'm reading the room, I think Demidov is probably most people's number 2, but Berkeley Catton, I would have a very difficult time putting anywhere below 4, I think, for me.
Yeah.
We're going to keep him high.
For sure.
I see the vision too. Catton is quite nuts.
Yeah, I've kind of grown to like him. I really like also the progression from like support role player like a year and a half ago to like full on possession and play driver this year is pretty interesting in terms of like his progression there, and it bodes well for his adaptability. I still have Demidov ahead just because Demidov's upside is just absolutely off the charts ridiculous, and on top of that, I think a lot of what Berkeley Catton does well, Demidov does well. But on top of that, Demidov has a defensive side to his game that is surprisingly polished. Like, it will take you by surprise. For me, Demidov's at 2, but like if there's any other arguments, anyone else that might sneak in there, some other players from your regions that you really, really like, that you want at second, like, now's the time.
Or if Graham just wants to talk a bit about Ivan Demidov and why he's awesome, that's fine too.
I mean, yeah, I think you guys pretty much hit the nail on the head with Demidov. I think tools-wise, I think he has probably the best skill set in the draft class outside of Celebrini. And for me, it's not much of a debate at 2. I mean, I put him as 2 to 3 as his range just because I wanted to have, some room for debate there, obviously. But yeah, it's not really much of a debate for me.
For sure. So
Yeah.
it seems by majority we've got Demidov at 2. I think we can move on from there.
Is the next big debate then Lindstrom versus Catton? Because
Yeah,
Luke,
I'd say
as a WHL scout, you are citing Catton. I know that both me and Hadi have a slight lean towards Lindstrom, but are also very open to that debate.
I think in our last meeting, I said I was splitting hairs between Catton and Lindstrom, and while I still think it's so close, I have them as my number 2 and number 3, I guess, right after each other. But Lindstrom's a phenomenal player. I'm so upset that he has been sidelined with his injury because I was really, really excited to watch more of him play and watch how he's developed. My issue with Lindstrom, I would say, is the only problem with him is I think his vision lacks at times. I think he's a strong player. He's strong on the puck. He's strong on the body. He has great skill in tight. He's got tight hands. He's got a good shot. He knows how to play with other skilled players, which I think is an underrated attribute, I would say, knowing how to play with higher level competition. That said, I still have to lean Catton just because I've seen it's every day with this guy. Every single game he goes in there and he's basically pulling out a goal and an assist pretty much every single time. And every single time it's a projectable goal and assist. It's him making a great move to the net through sticks and through hands to get a tight goal. Or it's him coming in off the rush and finding a trailer through traffic that you didn't even see coming. You didn't even notice the guy coming down the ice, and then suddenly he has the puck on his stick and it's in the back of the net.
For sure.
That's why I lean Catton. I would understand, and I don't think I would feel too poorly if you would have Lindstrom ahead of Catton. But for me, where it was a little bit of a splitting a hair, now I feel that it's Catton is, I think, the top player in the WHL for me at this point.
We can go with that.
I'm happy siding with that too.
So Catton at 3, Lindstrom at 4. Any objections? Anyone else want to make a case for a player before we move on? Cool. All right, so that's how it works out. So I think this is where we start talking about Parekh and Dickinson. Maybe Levshunov in that conversation. Zeev Buyan.
I was going to say Zeev over Levshunov, yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Personally, I would have Zeev Buyan as my best defenseman of the class. I currently have him as high as 4 on my personal list. I think he's just the best in-zone defenseman in the draft. The things that he's done in the NCAA and even at the World Juniors has been an immeasurable feat of poise. He has a fantastic understanding of how to develop play and how to make most of every single advantage that he's given. His IQ is off the charts. And even by the end of the World Juniors, honestly, he was getting more and more ice time. He got promoted in the semifinals against Finland, which for a 17-year-old, I'm sure is going to be the first of many gold medals that he is going to see.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that there is going to be an NHL defenseman here. And when you can transition between offense and defense as well as Zeev does, I don't think that Parekh and Dickinson have a total mastery on both ends of the ice as he does. It's what puts him above both of them for me.
For sure. I'm comfortable with it. Any objections to Zeev at 5? Anyone else want to make a case? Or
I think you're right, Hadi. I think it's one of those 4 defensemen, and really, like, it's whatever your flavor is that you like in a defenseman.
Yeah.
Who's gonna go in which order? So I'm totally down with any of those guys in that order.
For sure. The next one I'm comfortable with is Zane Parekh, because Parekh, I mean, I think the defensive issues have been a bit overblown in his game. He's a decent enough player in zone that he can get away with it. Sometimes he'll just bear hug a guy and not really focus on where he's positioned, but that's something you could tweak. And the offense that's in his game is just unteachable. It's just he does things offensively that I can barely visualize a player even imagining to do that, and he'll like hit a lane that no one else sees. He'll stick handle through a check with like the most ease I've seen at the offensive blue line. He's got a wicked shot. It's just the offensive toolkit is way too advanced for me to kind of bet against him. I think that if everything works out with Perek, you've got the highest upside defenseman in this class. Like he could easily, like he could score a point per game if he's developed well. He's that good offensively. So like, I have to make the case for him here at 6, and then for me right now, it's between the 3 defensemen left is Perek, Dickinson, Levshunov in that order. Like that's how I see them right now.
I'd agree.
I'd
Me and Jordan actually had the
too.
opportunity to see Perek live, and he is just as nutty in person as he is on film.
Yup.
The way that this guy sees lanes is unrivaled in this draft, I'd say.
For sure. So that brings us to Consta Helenius. I think it's about time we kind of talk about him. Annie, has your thoughts changed on him? Are you comfortable with him at 9? Do you want him a bit higher? Like, where do you stand on Helenius right now?
I'd have him higher, but that's just my opinion. I haven't seen that much, or Dickinson or Levshunov, so I just know that I like Helenius' game so much because I feel like he has really good foundation to build on. I know that he's not that skilled as some of the other top names, but I feel like the foundation is really good, and the IQ allows him to really translate his game to the NHL level too. So, but yeah, I'm okay with having him as 9.
I can make the argument for him at 8 over Levshunov too. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Levshunov scares me a little bit. There's a lot to love about his game, but the red flags with him are very, very present. I know that I'm probably like one of the higher people on him in this room as well. And even I have a hard time of justifying him at a higher position. And he's a rare case, I think, of a player that is this high, where the athlete is there before the hockey player. He's really, really strong on his feet. He can make unbelievable strength plays on the puck. He has some really impressive problem-solving skills once he's in the offensive zone. But the transition play with how much he can cause turnovers in his zone end, how much he panics at times under pressure, there's at least enough reason for me to give pause and give credence to Helenius' reliability, at least at this current juncture. So Helenius at 8 and Levshunov at 9, I won't put up an argument there.
I'm fine with it too.
Helenius, like the one question that I've had, and I think the one thing that's dropped him down my personal board a little bit, is a question about the tools and the overall upside. Like me and Hadi were talking about this yesterday a little bit, but we really see Helenius as being a high likelihood second liner, but there's little likelihood of movement on both sides of the floor and the upside of that. Because he is so hyper intelligent, as Annie explained. He's constantly has his head on a swivel. There's a reason that he's producing at a very high rate in Liga play, but the skating is just slightly above average. The handling is slightly above average. The shooting is slightly above average. It's kind of the whole thing about his tools is that they're all slightly above average, but there's not necessarily a tool that is like a slam dunk high end thing. And that gives me a little bit of pause, especially when we're debating about Helenius in the range of like some really, really high toolsy players. So I think like 8, 9 was very much the range that I was more comfortable with. So I'm personally happy with this.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is the exact same thing was said of Sebastian Aho in his draft year. And that kind of scares me. Because like
I agree,
I mean, the same thing was said
but Aho
about
had
Kotkaniemi.
wild skills. Like Aho
did.
had he did. Oh, he had a
draft year?
lot more pace. He was a lot more driven in his draft year, from what I remember, than I see in
guess.
Helenius.
Didn't he play?
I've seen the comparison made a lot, so I've like watched Helenius a decent amount with the comparison in mind, and it's not the most direct comparison that I've personally seen. But Annie, I mean, you've watched even more of Helenius than I have.
Yeah, I didn't watch Aho during his draft year, but I wonder, didn't he play in the juniors most of the season?
I think he was junior based for a decent portion of his draft year. Yeah.
Do you think it could affect how you view their draft years? Like, maybe Aho was able to showcase his skill more because he was playing against junior competition.
For sure. I'm very happy with having Hellenius here at 8, but I do think that things really open up here if we just move on to 10. I think like we're pretty solid on our top 9 at this point, going through it rather quickly, which is always nice, 15 minutes. But this is where things really, really open up. I know that Graham has Anton Salayev in the 5 to 10 range, so that would now currently be the book-ending end of that range. Some other names that I would throw out there that I personally like a lot in this range would be Igor Chernyshov, who I've circled back to for a couple of viewings, and David's going to be pretty excited to hear that I currently have him at like 9th or 8th on my personal board.
He's a monster.
He is very, very, very good, both in the KHL and the MHL. So we've got 2 Russians in there. I think Nikita Artemonov is another Russian. Like, Graham, this is like kind of your time to shine with this range. But beyond that, you've got like Michael Brandsegg-Nygard and Liam Greenstreet. This is a really, really packed range with a lot of forwards. That
I just feel bad for Cole Eiserman right now, who's just
I don't
being left out of this conversation.
I mean, do we prefer Cole Eiserman over the other players I just mentioned?
No. I don't. I just like you're mentioning all these guys that could go at 10, and Cole Eiserman's just sitting there like,
I've been on this train since about November, man. For me, this is old news.
But
so Graham, take it away.
Yeah, Graham, this is all you now.
Yeah, so with Salayev, like I do have him at 5 to 10, but he's always been like at the very tail end of that range, and I'd even really be comfortable having Chernyshov ahead of him. Although I'll also say Chernyshov and Artemonov are pretty much right neck and neck for me all season. I've had them back to back, so. Like I could even see Chernyshov, Artemonov, Salayev back to back potentially. It's just with Salayev, the upside is really questionable to me. I mean, he had that pretty tremendous scoring pace in the KHL at the beginning of the season, and then since then he just hasn't really been putting up any points, and I don't really know how much offense is there in general. Plus, his decision making is still kind of a major concern for me. He makes plays quickly, but it's not because I don't think he's always necessarily thinking situations through all that much. I think he guesses a lot and still makes kind of silly mistakes at times. But yeah, with Chernyshov and Artemonov, I think for me, those guys, the upside is a lot more intriguing. Chernyshov especially. Artemonov is more, he's one of the more well-rounded players in the entire draft, in my opinion. I love his playmaking. So yeah, I mean, if we want to go like 10 with Chernyshov and then 11 Salayev, or even really moving Salayev down more, I mean, I'm totally open to that.
Yeah. Artemonov is also a guy outside of my range who I've circled back a lot on because I find him very interesting. A guy who produces highly at the top level in Russia and also plays a game that's very projectable, just a way that's just going to succeed at every level. Not my range, but he is a guy that I have found to be a personal favorite outside of my range, I would say.
I would agree. Sure. Artemonov is very, very attractive. Honestly, like I kind of get scared of having him this low because I think that his potential is definitely in the top 10 range, or if he absolutely everything goes right, he can go as high as 5. But I have struggles with projecting how he can fit on an NHL team. But on the other hand, like this could be this year's Zach Benson, where everybody is too low on him, and we all are kicking ourselves in a couple of months. Very, very tempting player, I think, to put at 10.
I would say Chernyshov has some elements to his game that you rarely find in players his age. Like his defensive game is ridiculous. Artemonov's is too, like, but it's more like Artemanov's defensive game is more work rate focused. Chernyshov already has the positioning, the awareness, the little habits, the stick work. Like there's a bunch of elements to his defensive game that are great. On top of that, he has that power game already. He's able to drive lanes and, you know, drop the shoulder and, you know, work the give and go. And like there's a bunch of little habits and details in his game that already translate really, really well. And when he's not in the MHL dominating everybody, he kind of molds his game to his teammates, to his position in the roster and the lineup. Like he's a very adaptable player too. So if we're splitting hairs between the two, I have a slight preference for Chernyshov after recent viewings.
So do I. Like he would be my next player off the board from the European players.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty tight with the Russians. Like there's a reason that I've been talking about them for a while. I think personally, I would be a fan of Chernyshov, followed by Salayev, followed by Artemanov. But Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is very much in this range as well.
Liam Greentree is a player I really want to push
Liam
for
Greentree as well. But
before we even consider Eiserman,
if we can just get Chernyshov on the board and then move on to 11, that would make me happy. And then I would struggle to let Salayev fall further than 11 on this board. Like he's a complicated player and he's not always the most enjoyable to watch, even though he is wild and chaotic. Like he can be very frustrating at times, but the tools he has are not something that we even see in every single draft class. He is incredibly rangy, really mobile. His ability to close gaps off the rush is unrivaled in this draft class. And while the offensive upside certainly limited, like the early KHL season production was just kind of funny because it just did not correlate to his style of play or his strengths in any way, shape, or form. He's been a lot better since then, and he's been better in a smaller role. His minutes have been reduced, but he's been playing better hockey in those minutes in my viewings. So I'd be a fan of Salayev here. But while I do think Artemanov is certainly in this range, I don't think he's a player that I would just be blindly slotting in at 12 here. I think that we have a lot of other contenders. Michael Brandsegg-Nygard would be the first one I bring up, as stylistically has some similarities to Artemanov, but more of a shooter than a passer, which is a key difference. But he is a dominant player at the Allsvenskan level and has been, despite starting off the season going like 20 games with like 2 or 3 points. And even throughout that, he was a top 6 regular because he was consistently creating advantages. He's really effective in transition, very possession oriented. I could really see him being an easy second liner long term in the NHL. That makes the lives of his line mates so much easier. He does so much difficult work on both sides of the puck. And I think Greentree is certainly a player that I would also have in conversation here. And we can start talking about guys like Tisha Ginla pretty soon, but I would get Michael Brandsegg-Nygard off the board in the next like 2 picks, as well as Artemanov.
Yeah, I have to push for
Greentree. Ginla, I would say
100%.
I would also be pushing Salayev further down if we could. I would take MBN and Greentree over Salayev.
I'd be okay with MBN. MBN over Salayev, I'm very, very, very okay with. If we can do that, and then we do Greentree,
sure.
Would that be popular in the room? All right.
I love Greentree.
I think if you're talking to anyone who has watched any of the CHL, then Greentree is going to be a very popular guy around this range.
He will likely be.
I'm sure Jordan and Hadi have a lot to say as well.
Oh yeah,
more to say, but yeah.
I could talk about him for ages. I mean, I thought he was a pure shooter up until like November. Then I started kind of delving into his tape a bit more, and he got placed with different line mates, and all of a sudden he's just coming out of a shell playmaking wise. He's still not the best skater, like by any means, but he thinks the game at an advanced level, and you look at his game more in detail and you can see the small intricate decision making that makes him so good. I mean, he's a player who loves playing in space, who finds space really well, but also seeks it out when he needs to. He's able to just get around players really easily and position himself off the puck in ways that consistently create advantages. And like, he's one of the rare players in the CHL that creates off puck assists pretty consistently. Like he'll drive lanes to open up different ones. He'll lift the stick on his way to the net. Like, players usually in the CHL don't do the things that Liam Greentree does so well. So for me, like, there's no debate. I even think 13 might be a little bit too low. Like I prefer him by like a decent margin over MBN, but we're here now. I think that 13 is fine. It's well within my range for him, and it's well within Jordan's range for him. So like we can work with this.
We
But
could
I do
swap him
think
up with Salayev. Like I think like there's more enthusiastic support here for Greenfield and Salayev.
I just
Or no?
like Graham has really made a big push for Salayev in the top 10. We've already dropped him to 12. Like I think
for sure.
I think this is good, but I don't think we can spend much more time than this kind of slipping Cole Eiserman down the list.
Sure, we can. I mean,
Yeah.
personally, I have Connolly above Eiserman at this point in time. And I think Artemonov is still on the list too.
Yeah.
I would not be arguing.
There's people around the league who have Stiga ahead of Eiserman as well.
Oh, Lord.
I see the vision with that too. Eiserman
Not
has
me.
hey, if
many people are saying
very smart people, I'm sure. Eiserman is scary. I have yet to have a good viewing of him, and I've seen just about every single game available to me about him. There's a lot of projectability issues, I think, with his game. For a pure scorer, he really, really doesn't do a lot off of the rush. His skating issues have been a bit overblown in my opinion, but the criticism of he struggles to find separation, he tends to be a little bit floaty in the offensive zone. Play tends to find him simply because if you run around in a circle long enough, eventually your teammates will find you, especially when he's playing with James Higgins and Max Plant, which are two of the better playmakers in the USHL at this point. And I find that he's also struggled when put up against NCAA competition. There was a game against Clarkson back in December where he was basically just fully suppressed. And I think it's fairly easy to suppress him. There were times against Sweden and the Five Nations where he just didn't have an answer to their coverage. So he just resigned to being a pitching machine, throwing pucks at the circles for 15 minutes at a time, basically. And when he gets frustrated, he tends to take some silly penalties. I mean, I know I'm coming off like really, really hard on him, but the appeal of the shot, and I think the numbers are kind of overinflating his real world value. There is a lot of work that needs to be done here. And if it arrives, he can reach that line one, power play one potential that he's got. But there's simple things that goal scorers in the NHL need to do to find success, and I just don't see them in Eiserman at this point. He needs to come a long way to convince me.
Yeah, I mean,
the doubts are big, and
for sure.
He is young for the draft class, which would be one counterpoint in terms of him being a lot more raw than other players. But I'm also with David. I have yet to see a good viewing this season. I saw a couple good viewings last season as a D-1, but since then it's been difficult for Eiserman.
Yeah, just so we can just kind of move past it. Like, are there any other players? Like, obviously Trevor Conley over Cole Eiserman. I'm not fully on board with it, but I can understand the argument there. Are there any other players that people would like to have at 15 before we go to Conley versus Eiserman?
I think once those two players are off the board, we start talking about Iginla and maybe Basha as well. But yeah. I feel pretty confident that I would take Eiserman and Connolly and Artemonov all ahead of them.
Okay.
At this juncture.
Cool.
Perfect.
So we'll go with that. So Conley versus Eiserman. Conley, listen, he's like, he can be pure pond hockey, but I've really liked his defensive game recently. Like
he has come a long way. I had a lot of the same bullish opinion that you had on him coming into the year, but he's really, really put it together as of late. The switch between him and Eiserman for me has come relatively recently too.
Yeah.
He's figured it out. I have a lot of faith in him coming forward. He's actively using his playmaking, which is something that I really, really appreciate. He's one of the smartest playmakers in the draft, but he doesn't really like to use it that much. He likes to carry the puck. He likes to make things happen himself. And I think at the World Junior A, he kind of found out that it doesn't work all the time. And he just said, all right, fine, I'll pass the puck more. And things are happening because of it. Something that I found interesting about his scoring at the USHL too is that he is the first DY player to lead the USHL in points per game since I believe it was Bobby Brink in 2019. Kyle Connor did in 2015 and Middlestat too, but good company for USHL scoring.
For sure.
I have
Definitely.
nothing but good things to say of him as of late.
For sure. Yeah, I'm comfortable with it. I guess we go with that. Luke, is this time to talk about Tej, or is this too early?
I think it's time to talk about Tej, but I think it's with the understanding that he's probably not going to be the primary driver at the next level. I think that I don't think that that's a bad thing. I mean, 2 weeks ago, Zach Hyman was number 1 in wins against above replacement on Evolving Hockey. Like, complementary players can be very, very effective at the next level. And I think Tej Ginla has pretty much everything that you would want in a complementary player. He's hard on the forecheck and he wins those battles. He's unafraid to go to the net and he plays way bigger than how he is. He's good in transition and he's good off the cycle. He's got great shot mechanics and is a much better playmaker than he gets credit for. It's if you catch the viewing of him playing with Cristal, it is so much fun watching those two guys go to work playing together. I do have some issues with I think he bails on the defensive zone a lot. I think he's very, very focused on getting out and spreading the ice in transition, and often that comes at the expense of his defensive game. I also think it does limit his transition game as well. I think he would be a lot more effective if he stayed lower and supported the play a lot more than he currently does. But I don't think that that's a difficult fix, honestly. I mean, it's a cliche, but he's the son of an NHLer. If there's anyone who's going to figure out a small thing like that, it's probably going to be him. I'd be comfortable slotting him here at 17. Just with the understanding he's not going to be the guy, but I think that's fine. I don't think that. I think that you are having. That's all I would say about Tej Ginla. He's a great player. Sure. And he has a lot of the things that you would expect and really, really covet for a secondary scoring player, a secondary support type player. So this is probably where I'd have him.
For sure. Perfect. Like, the defensive game is definitely an issue, but I think that there's still enough in his game where he can kind of develop those tools. Like, for me, oftentimes, I mean, it takes a lot of intelligence to keep up with Andrew Cristal. And when I saw him at the Top Prospects game and watched the games before and after, like, his play style didn't change. It's just that his intelligence is the exact same in all those situations, but he went from having Andrew Cristal on his line to playing with kind of decent but not overwhelmingly good CHLers, and he was like that. That's when he started leading play, and like he made Andrew Cristal modify the way that he plays. He made Andrew Cristal like hit lanes that he wouldn't usually, just with his body language, with his head, with his shoulders, just kind of showing Cristal where he wants him to go when Ginla has a puck. So like manipulating high-end teammates like that into the good areas, like I'm a big fan of that. But now I think we have like 3 players, that maybe 4, that are still like kind of technically in this range. Luke Misa, Andrew Basha, Alphonse Frey, and Adam Jiricek. Are there any other names people want to throw in there before we kind of debate those 4?
I would have a little bit of pause with Adam Jiricek being a shoo-in in this range. Like, I know Annie's also had some difficult viewings of Jiricek. I think I'd wait a little bit closer to 25 and to 20 with him. At the very least, I don't think he's in this range of 4 players. I think that Misa, Basha, and Frey would be my personal next 3. I'm a really, really big fan of Alphonse Frey. I know that he's not a player that quite as many of us have gotten to watch just yet, but he is a highly dynamic, really toolsy, really intelligent left shot defenseman, very capable in transition and offensively, and his defensive work is solid, if not perhaps the hallmark of his game. But his metrics at the J20 level are like unrivaled. He's producing like the chances he's creating in terms of driving high danger scoring chances is off the charts good for defensemen, and he's been the most dominant Swedish player that I've watched so far this season, and it hasn't been very close. But I know that Luke Misa and Andrew Basha both have a lot of fans in here as well. Both players that are extremely pacey, very, very good skaters. That's something that all 3 of these players have in common. But Jordan, what's your take on Luke Misa?
I like Luke Mies a lot. I really do. I think he's probably a winger at the next level. He's got a ton of speed. He got a ton of skill. He's like involved in all of their offense. Like he creates so much for that team. He's tenacious, but I think he's lacking a little bit on the defensive side. But like it's not due to lack of effort. That's for sure. I think he's getting to the middle of the ice, better than I've seen the viewings of him where he's been a little bit, on the outside, but then I see viewings where I'm like, okay, yeah, he's really bringing this in. He's a really good player. A bit smaller, a bit older, but usually guys who compete at the level he does and skate like him can usually overcome those. So that's why I don't really have any reservations about him being a first rounder. That's for sure.
Yeah, I also want to add, Jordan, you seem to like Beckett Seneca a bit more than Luke Misa, right? Do you want to comment on that?
Luke Misa is the better player right now, no doubt. Like that's obvious. Beckett Seneca, he's got so much upside. He tested it very, very well at the top prospects game, like very athletic. He was surprisingly top 5 skating backwards, which like I don't think you wouldn't really expect a forward to be in there. Like,
or even need. Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was really strange. But anyways, then not that means anything to his projection really, but his IQ and his skill is really, really high level. He still sometimes forgets that he's like way bigger than he is. Like sometimes it's weird. Like he'll beat out an icing, or he'll like, engage in a battle along the boards, and he's trying to like, dip and dodge his way like underneath somebody. I'm like, dude, you're not like 5'10" anymore.
Yeah.
Context on him is he grew like 5 inches in like 6 months or so.
Yeah.
I think that's probably like making why he looks so awkward out there. But I think once he puts it together, I think the skill and the IQ and just the fact that he is athletic, he's a big guy and all that stuff. And he actually competes harder than I maybe originally gave him credit for earlier in the year. I do see a guy who could really be big time, but right now Luke Mies is no doubt the better player. But if Seneca hits, then he could be big time
for sure.
Right.
Just to kind of move things on, let's say we go Seneca, Basha, Misa, Frey. Are there any objections?
I would fight for Frey a
higher.
decent amount
Yeah,
higher
me
in there.
too.
Yeah, like I would say Frey and Basha would be my next 2 players off the board personally.
We can
Luke,
do that.
tell me about Andrew Basha, because I know he's a ton of fun.
Basha is a guy who I've had to, I think at the beginning of the year, I was pretty hesitant to rank him this highly because I knew how much he was playing with other top-end talent. But at a certain point, it becomes pretty undeniable. He's got a pretty expansive offensive package. Like it spans everything. He's a great playmaker. He's a great shooter. And he's a great skater. And then at that point, you're kind of asking yourself, like, okay, well, how has he fallen this far? And I don't know. It just he is an excellent player. I don't really have many qualms about his game. His defensive game is fine. He doesn't do a lot defensively, in my opinion. He doesn't generate a ton of turnovers in either end. But I think he's got an offensive package that's really difficult to step away from. I mean, I think he's a very similar player to Luke Misa in some respects, in the fact that he has got a great playmaking, great puck handle, good shot, very, very fast, and plays with a lot of pace. That this is pretty much about the last spot that I would comfortably have him. I mean, he's looked really good even in the absence of Caden Lindstrom. And yeah, it's just one of those guys that I don't think you can pass up past 20, past 23, sure. That sort of thing. I think he's a player that if he's not talked about a lot more come draft day, then I think that a few people are definitely making a mistake.
For sure.
That's what I'll leave it at.
For sure.
Fair.
I do think that, we're at 22 now. I think that, I mean, passing on Adam Jiricek a bit more than this, I think will come back to bite us because,
Yeah.
like, there's
Yep.
there's
Now's the
definite
time for
upside there
Jiricek.
for sure.
100%.
I think we can just
yeah.
slot him in here. Yeah.
Like this, despite being out for the season with an awful injury and him being really raw, like this is a player whose biggest strength is being defensively violent, and he was listed at like 160 pounds all season, but
Yeah.
he really, really is violent, and he has a pretty decent frame to grow into. He's like 6'1" or 6'2", and he's a
For
really
sure.
high-end skater. The mobility is very impressive. At the junior level, especially internationally, he's flashed some really high-end skill, some really impressive offensive zone instincts, but his professional play in Czechia this season has been really, really difficult to kind of sift through, and it's been very much deer in the headlights in the breakout and in transition all the time, making consistent mistakes in that facet of the game. But when given a pairing mate who can kind of take on that load for him, he's a lot more interesting to me. Like whenever he's played like in flashes with Tomáš Galvas internationally, he thrives because Galvas is a really mobile, strong transition defender, and it allows Jiricek to play to his own strengths. So I'm very happy keeping Adam Jiricek here at 22, despite the overall question marks in terms of likelihood of hitting upside. And I would say that like the one other European defenseman that I would want in the next 3 to 4 picks for me would be Dominik Medinka. He's a player that I know you all know that I am a pretty big fan of. I've made some stylistic comps to David Reinbacher, but I would be curious of what you guys have seen of him, because we all know that I'm pretty enthusiastic.
Yeah, I mean, I've watched a bit of him, and I see a very neurotic defenseman, a player who's still figuring out what works and what doesn't, but the tools are definitely there. I mean, he's a fantastic skater. He's big, he's rangy, he's strong. Moves pucks early and really accurately. The hands are a pretty big concern. Like he has trouble stick handling out of trouble, and sometimes with his back to the play, he'll kind of panic and throw it up the first lane he sees a bit, and that can cause some turnovers. But overall, like, there's a definite toolkit here that could very well see him be like a top 20 pick by the end of the year. I think that's not unrealistic. The way that Tom Willander and David Reinbacher climbed last year, like teams are pretty big fans of this kind of profile of player. I'm not against putting him here. For me, this is the lowest I could have Tarek Parasak. Like, I'm a big fan of what he brings to the game. And yeah, I mean, for me right now it's between Parasak, Yakimchuk. We can even throw Kiviharju, Jesse Polkinen in there, but Dinka's definitely in this conversation. I'd like to have him in before maybe 25, but there's still a couple players I want to look at first. Yeah,
that's totally fine for me. Like 25 was my goal for this meeting. I'm very happy with that.
Like, I'm really tempted to just plug in Tarek Parasak right here because, like, holy crap, this kid is so smart. Like,
I have to say, I've personally dropped him a lot. Not that, like, this is probably the range I'd have him, honestly. But relative in terms of my opinion, I'd say I've dropped him a fair amount, just because he is undoubtedly so smart. And is very similar to Gabe Perreault last year, where it's a guy who has kind of so tools, but is just a brain where he kind of arrives in the right spot constantly. He has great hands and tight, and he makes a ton of use of his time on the power play with that. Really, but that's the big thing with me is I have a tough time balancing this guy who is clearly very smart and clearly has a great ability to find space and find time, but also a guy who plays on a fantastic team. Prince George is really good, and even like Andre Becher, who he plays on a line with at 5-on-5, is also a great player who's having a fantastic season. So this is probably where I'd have him. I don't think that he's quite at the same level as Gabe Perreault in terms of his tools. I think Gabe Perreault is a more toolsy player than Tarek Parasak was. But he's definitely a guy I have a little bit of a tough time with because he obviously exploded for 1 billion points at the beginning of the year, and then cooled off a bit. I'm not sure. I don't think I see a top line player in Tarek Parasak, and I think there's other guys, even if it's a lot less certain. they still have that somewhere in their game, maybe. Parasak is definitely looking as another complementary player, probably somewhere on the second line, I think, if he hits. But I don't think I have any problems with him in this range, for sure. I think this is probably basically exactly where I would have him, more or less.
For sure. Like for me, the only CHLers or just North American players I could see contend with Parasak at this range would be like Yakimchuk, perhaps maybe Michael Hage, but even then it's kind of a long shot. Miguel Marquez could be in the talk, but I'd like to have him a bit lower.
I love Marcus, but
Marquez is really fun.
We'll have to get him. He'll have to be lower, but I'm such a fan.
For sure.
He'll be in our first round, for sure.
Absolutely. I think we could just go ahead with Parasak right here, and then we can talk about the glut of European, well, just defensemen overall. Like for me, Yakimchuk is next. I like him a bit more than Badinka, but like it's
the upside's higher.
Yeah,
certainly.
Definitely. But Badinka is just such a projectable player. Like I just
The upside is absolutely sky high with Yakimchuk. I mean, if we watch our last meeting, we'll all know that I was pretty critical of Carter Yakimchuk, to put it lightly. And while I do think that a lot of those concerns, some of them remain, definitely 100% a better playmaker than I gave him credit for. He's
for sure.
Definitely able to find the slot a lot better than I think he was in earlier season viewings. And though his defensive game is honestly quite poor at the moment, I think that there are some simple adjustments that he could make that would improve it a lot. I've seen the ability from him to be a good transition defender, a guy who can do entry denials at a high rate if that's something that he is able to learn how to do. He chases hits a lot. And I think that with a very simple adjustment, with someone telling him like, hey, please don't do that. Please stop just blindly trying to hit people all the time. I think that he would honestly benefit from that a lot. His defensive game he's a 6'4" right-handed defenseman. I feel like some coach will be able to figure out how to make him. I mean, John Tortorella turned Rasmus Ristolainen into a playable top 4 defenseman. There is a coach out there that can turn Carter Yakimchuk.
That's not a very flattering comparison.
I was going to say.
It's not.
Is Rasmus Ristolainen really worth 24th
the lowest
overall?
of the low. The lowest of the low. Like low bar. Absolutely a low bar, but I think he can clear that low bar. He can figure it out. But the offensive tools are so hard to deny. He's a he's a great puck handler for a defenseman his size, and has a good amount of deception on those plays that he doesn't really get enough credit for. He does lean on his shot a lot, but his shot is really good. He is a strong shooter, and this is probably where I'd have him. If you really believe in his upside, I think you could even slot him higher than this, but personally, it's a big risk. So this is probably where I would have him. I'm
fine with this.
This is
for sure. Now it's time to talk about Badinka, Kiviharu, Jesse Pulkkinen. Any other names in there?
Pause at Michael Hage. I think that we are reaching the floor of where I'd put him as well. He's come a long way since our last meeting. He has gotten everything to click. I have a lot of love for Hage because he's probably faced the most adversity in the most diverse set of ways of probably anybody in this draft. And he has still managed to dig deep and just improve his game on every single level. He's adapted to the USHL speed in remarkable form. And he's probably one of the most creative passers in this draft. The production is starting to showcase it too. Chicago's finally starting to win games. They're looking like a team again. It's all coming on the back of Michael Hage's just finding his game. I think that there's a very real possibility that he's the top 6 forward in the NHL based on the viewings I've had of him as of late.
For sure. I'm comfortable with him. Like, we're hitting almost the hour mark.
I would argue Badinka over Hage from what I've personally seen. I think like 25 was kind of my floor with Badinka. If we could just swap those two around, that'd be great. And I'd also probably argue Jesse Pulkkinen over Aaron Kiviharu, which seems to be the next head-to-head in here.
And you have priority on... Yeah, and you have priority on these two guys. I want to hear your thoughts on both of them.
I I can see why someone would argue Pulkkinen over Kiviharju. I personally think Kiviharju's got a bigger upside because of his high IQ, and I also got some worries of Pulkkinen's game speed and decision making, but I'd be okay if you want to rank Pulkkinen higher than Kiviharju.
They're certainly the same range. Like I fully agree in my viewings, they are very comparable. Like I'm not gonna make a mess, and it's not a hill I'm gonna die on. But with Pulkkinen, I'm seeing a player in a profile that we just never really see in terms of a massive 6'6" defenseman who skates extremely fluidly, is a high-end puck handler, very strong transition defender, uses his reach to really shut down those lanes. And with Kiviharju, I see the profile being a bit more limited in terms of what he can be in the NHL specifically. I think Kiviharju likely tops out. Like if both players only end up staying in Europe, I think Kiviharju ends up being the better defenseman in European pro leagues. But I think that Pulkkinen really does project a bit more easily to the NHL, which is kind of funny to say considering that Kiviharju's been talked about in the top 5 range in this draft class for the last 2.5 years. And yes, Pulkkinen's a D+1, but from what I've seen, I'm a lot more enthusiastic when it comes to Pulkkinen, and he's also just been very impressive.
Do you want to call? You want to use the word? Do you want to say the word?
Unicorn. Yes.
There we go.
Yes. There we go.
There are no. I just this term is just so overused. There aren't 5 unicorns a draft. That's not how unicorns work. Anyway, we kind of have to get things rolling here. So I'm thinking of the players you mentioned: 25 Bedinka, 26 Hage, 27 Jesse Pulkkinen, 28 Kiviharju. Then after that, we have to plug in Miguel Marquez. I can't drop him any lower than this.
True.
He is a fantastic player.
Honestly, I could live with pushing Kiviharju below Marquez. I think that he is. I think Kiviharju can honestly be pushed out of the first round. We've just seen more from a lot more people.
I'd like him to stick at least at 32. I agree. This season's been difficult, but he was injured back in October. He's only coming back in a month or month and a half from injury. And I'm very curious to see how he looks when he comes back. And I know that that many months off of injury can result in a whole variety of things in a player when they return. And I think that range of possible outcomes, especially for a player that does have his IQ, as Annie said, Kiviharju is among the 3 most intelligent draft eligible defensemen this season. He is
for sure
extraordinarily smart and a really high end passer. But I think Miguel Marquez has perhaps more tangible NHL upside than Kiviharju does.
For sure. So just to close things off, 25 Bedinka, 26 Hage, 27 Pulkkinen, 28 Marquez, 29 Kiviharju. Then I've put in kind of Sasha Boisvert and Ryder Ritchie in that order. Does anyone else have anyone that they really want to plug in here as the last pick?
Personally, I don't view Ryder Ritchie as a first round pick. I mean, I know that I think we've talked about it, Hadi, before, and I think I'm definitely a lot lower on him than other people, but I have a tough time slotting him in as the same range as Marcus. I think Marcus, a guy like Marcus is Ryder Ritchie is a guy who's known for his offensive upside, and I think that Marcus has clearly showed much more offensive upside than him. And Richie struggles with a lot of things that I don't see him not struggling with at the next level. His first touch is very poor, in a very noticeable way. He has good instincts, offensive instincts, but I also do think that he lacks a little bit in terms of processing speed in some cases. For me, he's a little bit lower. Personally, if we're talking about WHL guys, I'd be more interested in Charlie Ellick or in this range in terms of WHL players. They're not comparable. Ellick's a defenseman, obviously. But I think that Ryder Ritchie could be an excellent top 6 forward if everything goes right, but a lot of things have to go right. And whatever team drafts him has to be quite patient and quite involved with his development for those things to happen. So
For sure.
for me, I think he's more of like the first 3 or 4 picks out of the second round.
For sure. If you want to make a statement, we can get that done. The players I have left in my rankings that I still kind of view as first rounders. I know you don't agree, Jordan, but Henry Muse. I have EJ Emery. I think Raoul Bollard. I think this is time to talk about him. I really, really like him. So this might be another player we can include in that. Harrison Brunicky I've really grown on, and he's basically forcing his way into my top 35. So yeah,
I like the positive Lucas Pettersson at this range.
Lucas Pettersson. Okay.
I would wait a little bit. First, I mean, Sasha, you have not talked all meeting. Raoul Bollard, the QMJHL has finally arrived to our meeting. So what is your take on him?
All right. Yeah, no, I'm just love listening. It's love listening to you guys talk about hockey. But Raoul Bollard, he wasn't on my list to start the year, right? He's the guy that's really grown throughout the season. I find he's improved his vision, his creativity. He's been attacking the middle of the ice a lot more, which has opened up those outlets for him. What I like about him over Massé, just as a comparable here, is he drives play on his line, right? He's the one that takes charge. He carries the puck. He's not the fastest guy in transition, but he's efficient. And that ability to go to the middle of the ice, pass off to one of his teammates, or decide to take a shot, which is something he should be doing more often, has really turned his game into he has more facets. There's less one-dimensional, I find. He also has a higher IQ than Massé, that's for sure. Better scanning habits, I find. The one thing about him is he's just not physical. He doesn't get physically engaged, especially down low to defensive zone. So I want to see that improvement, especially playing center. But one thing that sticks out a lot with Bollard is his ability to win faceoffs, which is a key component of being a centerman, especially at the higher levels. So I see him as a much higher floor than Massé. So yeah, he can fit in this early second round, but it really depends how you view him. In his dynamism, he doesn't have a lot of dynamism, but I think that his floor can put him in the range of about 30 to 45. That's kind of where he falls for me.
For sure. I think we can wait off on him then.
I would want to support you, Hadi, though. Like, if you want to go with Henry Muse, at least in conversation here, like Jordan, I know you're a little bit lower than we are, but I caught a lot of viewings of Henry Muse over the last 2 years in Ottawa, all of them live, and the Ottawa system is incredibly disincentivizing to dynamic offensive defensemen to be dynamic. We saw it with Pavel Mintyukov last season, where he was in a very, very composed and limited role. He played it very, very well, obviously, but he was not a player that was actively activating all the time in Ottawa like he was in Saginaw, for instance. And Henry Muse had flashes of that activation last season, especially playing behind Mintyukov, where he was in a role where he could make some more mistakes and he wasn't relied on to play 25 minutes a night. And I'm a very big fan of his passing ability. The handling, the skating are all very fluid. The defensive game, I will give you it. It is chaotic. It is very inconsistent. There are games where he is a high-end rush defender and other games where he gives 10 feet gap. There's a big variance there in how he plays defensively, and there's certainly questions around that. And he's played a couple games at forward this season just because Ottawa has had some injury issues, and he's looked lost playing forward. He's certainly a defenseman, but the handling ability, the raw offensive tools are very impressive. And from what I've seen from watching the Ottawa 67s so much over the last couple of years, is that their system very much limits players in terms of being able to showcase their skill, but it allows players to develop that skill. And they're not necessarily flashing it on a game-to-game basis, but they're learning a lot of really important pro habits. They're coached by a former NHL head coach who I've had a lot of issues with watching coach the 67s, but who has been doing some really good things to develop the high-end players coming through his program, like Mintyukov. So with Henry Muse, it would be very much an argument of what he could be rather than what he's showing right now. But I have been a fan of that potential.
For sure. We are hitting the hour mark, so I really want to cruise through this.
We're at the halfway point in the rankings, right? So I think we're kind of on schedule.
Yeah, I just want to make sure like we might have some like we have a large event of players that are coming up. I just want to like for me Charlie Ellick, I'm comfortable with him here at 31, maybe a tiny bit more than Henry Muse, given that Jordan. I mean, you're not the biggest fan. I think we can go with him.
I like Alec a lot, and it's not that I hate Muse. I actually have him like not far past here, but Sebastian was right in his assessment of him of the Ottawa system. So I respect the fact that you're saying he's developing skills, not being able to showcase them maybe the way we would want him to. So I'd concede on that for sure. Yeah,
for sure. Maybe
we saw this with Pinelli last year as well,
yeah.
and he had a massive D+1 season now. Like the Ottawa system's a very strange one in the OHL. It is far from standard, but I think Muse could be a really big like late riser in terms of like a D+1 stock in hindsight.
For sure. I think we might just have 4 right-handed Ds in a row here.
Nice.
Yeah.
We have Charlie Ellick.
Throw Lucas Pettersson in to mix it up.
He'll be coming up soon.
For sure. I mean, Charlie Ellick, Henry Muse, EJ Emery, Harrison Brunicky, for me is how it goes down at this range. Do we have any objections or?
I'm not sure. I mean, with Ellick is clearly there's 2 defensemen after Ellick who I would consider from the WHL, and that's Brunek and Terrence Smith. I think those are both very interesting defensemen. Very similar defensemen in a lot of ways, but Ellick is, I would say, pretty dissimilar from most of the defensemen from the WHL in that I think he's a pretty well-developed defender in terms of like his defensive game. I think is very well developed compared to a lot of the other guys. I don't think I'd expect offense to come to the next level, but he's good. With Brunek and Smith, Brunek is definitely the better rush defender than Smith, but I think Smith is the more dynamic player than Brunek.
Okay.
But those two, I think if you can put them in the same kind of area, I can't see a situation in which they're more than like 3 or 4 picks apart in terms of how valuable they are.
I also think we can throw Emil Hemming in this conversation.
Yep,
like
for sure.
That's definitely a player.
Tanner Howe as well.
Yeah. We might just put him back to back, right? Like Emil Hemming. I'm blanking. Where's Tanner Howe? There he is. Perfect. And then after this, I mean, I as much as like I understand where you're coming from, Luke. I don't know if we can slip Ryder Ritchie any lower than this, right?
No, absolutely.
Yeah. 33 is already a statement.
Yeah, that's probably where is pretty close. I mean, there's not really many guys outside of this that have the upside that Ritchie does. It's just he's got a lot of question marks all over his game. But
for sure. Then it's Terrence Smith.
Who do we have at 33?
We currently have EJ Emery at 33.
Are we sure about that?
I like him.
I like him too, but not that much.
Okay.
I think that we can posit Emming Howe, Ritchie all over him at this point.
Okay.
Emery does a lot of things right, but a lot of what he does comes in flashes, and I think that he's kind of like a Maxime Sturbach situation from last year, where he's just like one of the nobody on his team can really do what he does. So it highlights what he does a bit more, but he doesn't do it consistently enough that it warrants like borderline first round conversation in my books.
For sure. This is where I start thinking of Raoul Boilard, but obviously like Terrence Smith, Harrison Brunicky. I know, Luke, you stand on Smith over Brunicky, but like where do you stand on both of them? Is this the right slot for them, or would you let him slip a tiny bit?
I'd let them slip personally. I mean, my issue with Brunek is he's an offensive defenseman that hasn't scored a ton at the WHL level. But the opposite to that is that his defensive game is a lot more well polished than some of the other defensive defensemen or offensive defensemen that we would see in this kind of range. Terrence Smith is more exciting, but I think I would drop them probably closer to 40 than I would closer to 30. If
I could put
for sure.
Yeah. I would put EJ Emery in that same boat of honestly, I would take Brunicky over Emery at this point, and I would not fault that.
I just remember John Mustard, which kind of throws.
Oh my God! Yes. Yeah, what am I doing? I'm obviously asleep at the wheel here.
Yeah.
John Mustard is borderline first round potential for me. He's definitely in my first round. Definitely one of the best skaters in the draft. One of the most entertaining players in the USHL circuit, an unreal passer. And he's doing it all as like playing in the USHL for the first time. His rise has been like meteoric. A very underrated shot, one of the best feet in the draft, I would put. Honestly, like if we want to retroactively put him like 31, 32 range, I would not fault it.
Yeah.
Over Hemming, at least. Like,
Yeah,
I
for
know,
sure.
like, Annie, you haven't gotten the chance to talk about Hemming just yet because we just slotted him in pretty quickly there. But he's been a very interesting player to watch this season, right? Like the power tools are very interesting. The shot is excellent, but like the playmaking is a bit of a question mark. But I've liked the defensive game in Liga play at the very least.
Yeah. I think late first or early second is really good range for him. I think the defensive game is really nice, and the questions I have with him are consider his decision making and the passing ability, but he plays really limited minutes, so I think it's also a tough spot to find and develop his offensive game. So and the physical tools and especially the shot is really good. So
for sure.
Yeah,
really
and I think Booyah can probably fit in right after. Honestly,
Yeah.
If you're betting on his growth potential, like this is his range.
For sure. The way I have it going down is from the players we mentioned: Alec 31, Muse 32, Mustard 33, Emil Hemming 34, Tanner Howe 35, Ryder Ritchie 36. And then we start hitting the Emery, Brunicki, Terrence Smith conversation, right? Unless
I would throw in Lucas Pedersen. I would do Lucas Pedersen for David's sake here.
One thing
I
I
was
want
going
to
to say, I think we can start talking about the Europeans a little bit.
For Mustard at 32, I think I don't think that's unreasonable. I think Mustard is just genuinely like to have him outside of the first round is a genuine crime on my part.
I would. I'd be open to switching Alec for Mustard. I'm just also in the same boat. Muse is like I really would like to have him in the first.
Okay, so we do Mustard 31, Alec 32, Muse 33. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay.
Alec is not a shoe-in first rounder for me either. I like him, but I don't think I don't feel too strongly about whether or not he's outside of the first round.
Oh, for sure. Awesome. That's perfect. So Pedersen is at 39 after Raoul Boilard at 38. We still have Emery at 37. Is that an issue or lower?
Yeah, lower.
Okay.
I would put like Emery should not be going above Brunicki in my books.
Okay. Cool. We can work with that. So I think Brunicki and Terrence Smith should be next, right? Unless Cole Baudouin is in this conversation.
There's a lot of names here. Like Hadi, there's a lot of Europeans in this range too. It's not just the NA guys. Like we've got Ondrej Koch, I think, is in this range. Tomasz Galvash, Leon Mugli, Stian Solberg. Like we have a lot of guys that are really entering their range here. First, I'll talk about Lucas Pedersen a little bit because we're slotting him in there at 38. He's a really, really high motor player, both in his very limited SHL minutes, but also in the J20 level. Constantly high pace, and he's at his best when he's at a high pace, which is always very intriguing. The defensive results have been very strong. He's very engaged. I think that the skill is a slight limiting factor. I think that he's a decent playmaker and has a decent shot that neither projects as like substantially above average. But I know that David was a really big fan because he checked him out last night for the first time and was very enthusiastic.
Oh yeah, he looked fantastic. He has this sort of take over a shift mentality that comes in every now and then, and when he is on, it's something special. He's a bit frustrating in that regard. I wish that there was there more often. I think it's a matter of like getting him going all the time, and if he does, we can like him for a lot of the same reasons we like Luke Misa. And it is frustrating because I do think that it's just a matter of how much is there at the end of the day. It's hard to put up a fight for him because if somebody were to be like, I just don't think he wants it bad enough, it's hard to fight against it. But he's been tearing up the J20 level for the past 5 games with 13 points in those 5 games, which is quite honestly ridiculous. And yeah, the most recent viewing I had of him, which is his most recent game that was available to me as of last night, honestly just ridiculous. I did not think that he was this kind of player until I watched it. It really showed what he was at his best, I think. And so my perception might be a bit skewed, but man, when he's on, he's on. It's something to watch.
Yeah.
While you're talking, David, I have to ask, what do you think of Teddy Stiga getting?
I was gonna.
close to his
He was.
This is
he
the
was
range.
yeah, for sure.
I agree.
Honestly, I would be. He could definitely be pushing up higher. I don't mind him at 39 as like a conservative pick, but he's the best complementary. He does. How do I put this? He plays a very complementary role wherever he is, but he's one of the best playmakers on this NTDB squad as well. He's sort of a jack of all trades in the regards of he can do everything. The NTDP currently only has like 2 guys that can play center. Stiga has slotted in. James Higgins needs a line mate. Stiga's there. It's this overwhelming adaptability and intelligence that is very rare to find. I imagine that if he keeps trending the way he does, I will be arguing about him in the first round come April, especially past the U18s, which I think is when he can showcase a lot of what he's capable of. I'm a big fan.
For sure.
Awesome.
The thing is, for me though, like Brunicky and Terrence Smith have to go soon. Like they're really, really good, and I would honestly strongly push for Brunicky over Smith. But Luke, you have final word on that, and you seem to like Smith just a smidgen more, right?
It's. I honestly could go either way. I think it's whether or not you believe that Terrence Smith is going to be an offensive defenseman at the next level, which is honestly kind of a big bet. Whether or not you bet that a high-scoring CHL defenseman who leans a lot on his shot on the power play is going to be an offensive weapon at the next level. I think Brunicky is definitely a safer bet and much more likely to become an NHL defender than Terrence Smith is. So I actually don't feel very strongly about which one of the two of them goes ahead of the other.
That works.
If we
I
are
still have some
talking
questions
about,
if they're like the next 2 necessarily off the board, because again, there's a lot of European guys that are in this range.
Yeah,
Like,
I think Brunicky's closer. I think Brunicki is closer to the first round than any of the European guys left. Like,
for sure.
I think that you are very enthusiastic about Brunicky. We can slot Brunicky in here, but I think there's definitely still some European guys in the mix where, like, I wouldn't just slot in Terrence Smith as like the default
I would just ask,
player in here.
Yeah, like I was just gonna ask, like between Leo Salin Vilanius and Thomas Galvish, who seem to be the 2 next Euros among D's on this list.
I know Annie's a big fan of Veti Väisänen. I have more questions personally, but this would be the time. It's definitely the range.
Yeah, I like him quite much, but I can understand the argument that his game doesn't, or there's a chance that it doesn't translate to the NHL level. But I like his physicality for young 17-year-old playing in Liga. And there was one game I watched recently where he showcased some really nice movement in the offensive zone, and I saw new things that I hadn't seen before. So, but I'm okay if you want to drop him a bit in these rankings.
I'm very happy keeping him inside our top 50, but I think like around 50 is around where I'd be more comfortable with him. Also because like there's some other really good defensemen that I know that you are also familiar with, like guys like Leon Mugli and Tomasz Galvash and Danil Ustenkov are all very much second round talents in my eyes as well.
Yeah.
For those, I like Galvas maybe the best, and yeah,
he's the most fun. Yeah. Galvash is an excellent skater, really intriguing puck mover. Like I would be a fan of Galvash here at 40, and I'd probably put Salim Vilanius at like 41.
I would posit Stiga at 41 if that's.
Oh, Stiga's not in there. Yeah. We'll put Stiga in first. I'm very happy with that.
At 40 or
Yeah.
41 after
40.
Galvash?
40.
I could put him at 40.
Okay, so Stiga
40,
at 40.
and then Galvash 41. Yeah, like I think like Stian Solberg is another player I would like in the next like 10 to 15 picks.
Oh, for sure.
But that there's less haste with that personally. The one player
For
I
me, the
would
haste-
really like to deposit right now before we get to Terrence Smith would be Ondrej Koch. Ondrej Koch is a really, really, really projectable player. Very intelligent defensive winger. Reminds me of Emil Hemming a little bit. I know that David St. Louis made that comparison in the EP ranking meeting as well, and I see it. Like the tools are refined. He's not going to be a top 6 NHLer by any stretch of the imagination, but he supports his line mates extremely well, and he's been playing some really, really good pro hockey. Like I caught like a recent Mestis game that he played, which is the second pro division in Finland, and that was really impressive to me. Like I've liked him in every viewing I've had going back to the Hlinka Gretzky in the summer.
Yeah, the way I have it playing out then is after Brunicky at 39, we have Stiga 40, Galvash 41, Ondrej Koch 42. I think this is really I can't drop EJ Emery more than this. He's in my first round, and he's probably the best rush defender in this draft. Like he's up there for sure. And I think people are concerned about, maybe he's going to struggle to put up like 20 points. I think he has 30-point upside for sure. I think he can develop into a fantastic defense first transition defender with some offensive upside. But then after this, we have to talk about Leo Solly and Vilenius. Like this has to be his range, right?
Yeah,
he's a very dynamic offensive defenseman. Like when he's on his game, he is a ton of fun. He gets a lot of pucks to the slot. Very, very shifty. Very solid skater. The defensive game is often painful for me in my viewings, and it's certainly inconsistent. But especially because he's playing on the same team as Alphonse Frey. With Vahwa in the J20, and the juxtaposition between the two is pretty intense because they're both similarly mobile and offensive leaning, but Frey is just consistently dominant, and Salian Vilenius doesn't look quite as good in contrast, but he is, in my eyes, a clear second-round talent. I like the offensive upside. The creativity in the offensive zone is a real strength, and this would be the range for sure.
For better and for worse, I see him like John Klingberg too. He has a lot of the good passing and the panic defensively. Like
very much.
I have a hard time separating the two in my mind when I watch
it. For sure. Now we have a problem because like there's Terrence Smith, Cole Baudouin, Cole Hudson, Leon Mugli, Stian Solberg, Maxime Mosse, Adam Yeko, Viti Väisänen,
Clark Caswell.
I had to mention Kamil Bednarik as well.
This high?
I would put him in the range. Yeah, definitely a very, very. He is in my top 10, I believe. For he's the next player up on my list.
Okay,
I definitely.
We've leaned very heavily for the U.S. So far, and I think I do see a big tier difference between Stiga and Bednarik.
Yeah,
at least
I don't like having them this close together. I think there's a major gap between the two.
And there are just a lot of European players in this range. Like I've stayed pretty quiet with the European guys because you guys have been very excited about the North Americans, but like there are a lot of players here. Like even guys like Simon Zetter are coming up in the range.
For sure,
this is very much a European range now. I think like Cole Hudson would probably be one of the ones that like among the North American players that I would have an eye on just because of the raw upside, and I know he's been very frustrating to watch this season.
Yeah.
Clark Caswell is also coming up, but I would probably slot in like Viti Väisänen in the next 5 picks. I'd probably want to slot in both Solberg and Mugli in the next.
I'm comfy slotting in Väisänen. I'm comfortable slotting Väisänen in right now at 46. Like that would be okay with me.
We can do that. I would say I definitely think that both Mugli and Ustinkov are in the same exact range. As Väisänen. I prefer those two to Väisänen a little bit, but I know that the room is leaning a bit in the other direction, so that's totally fine. We'll go Väisänen in 46, but I think that like Leon Mugli did not have the strongest World Junior Championship performance, but he is a really versatile and adaptable defenseman.
You flipped on him, have you?
Not flipped, not really. Like I think like him and Ustenkov are just a bit similar. Like they're interesting. Like Ustenkov is a transition beast. Like he is really, really great in the breakout, very, very dynamic moving forward into the offensive zone. within the offensive zone, he holds himself back a little bit, especially at the pro level, where you'd like to see him come out of his shell a bit more because the tools are quite impressive. And Mugli is a bit of the opposite, where the tools aren't as good, but he's playing to like the maximum capability of his toolkit currently. So Ustenkov has the higher upside between the two players, but Leon Mugli is a lot more refined, a lot more consistent, and a lot more impactful as of right now. And he's a player that I would not really want to drop too far past 50. But and I know Clark Caswell has a ton of support as well. So he's a player that I know. And Cole Baudouin as well.
Yeah, because like Baudouin, I have in my 33 to 40 range, and we're at 48 right now, and he's still not in. So
certainly in the range. Like I wouldn't be mad about Baudouin ahead of the glut of European defensemen. Same thing with Caswell. Like those are probably the last two NA guys that I wouldn't mind having ahead of a string of Europeans.
For sure.
But I would probably, like, Stian Solberg had an excellent World Junior Championship before he got exhausted. But his league tape is difficult. Norwegian pro hockey is a pain to watch.
It's bad.
It is really rough. Like it makes the All-Star game look pacey. And it was it's interesting. But it really does mean that, like, by far the best juniors I've gotten have been the World Juniors, just because the league tape has been difficult to kind of decipher. But so I'm happy dropping Solberg a little bit past the Switzerland-based defenseman.
For sure.
But they'd be the next ones in the range.
For sure. So Väisänen, Ustenkov, Mugli. In what order?
I'm okay with Väisänen first. Like, you guys seem to be excited about Väisänen. That sounds good to me. I would probably go Mugli over.
Right.
Ustinkov's more fun and more toolsy.
Exactly.
But we'll go Ustinkov Mugli. But if they can be back to back, that would make me happy.
For sure. So I've got him at 47, 48, 49 after Cole Baudouin at 46. That leaves Clark Caswell.
That's Clark Caswell's music.
There we go.
Absolutely. That leaves Maxime Mossé and Adam Yeko as outside of the top 50 prospects. So are we comfortable?
And Cole Hudson.
Yep.
Very comfortable with that.
And Cole Hudson.
Yep.
Okay. Perfect. I think Hudson is next then. I don't want to slip him too far out of this, but no, actually Caswell should be next.
First.
Caswell, I'd put him over.
We can put Caswell over all three European defensemen as well. Like I have no concern about that at all.
Yeah, Caswell's good. I'm very happy with having him done. Like, just such a projectable game. Great playmaker, always in the middle of the ice. So and wins a fair amount of puck battles too. I put him in this range for sure.
That's a problem. Hold on.
You're fine.
Okay, we're good. 49. Okay, so that's taken care of. Now Hudson at 51. I don't think, like, as much as I don't really like Maxime Mossé, I don't want to slip him too far out of the top 50. Like, I think he has to be known to the next players. He doesn't scan, but he doesn't really need to either. Like, he has the sixth sense for, like, where his teammates are without even looking. So I don't think it limits his game too much. He's got a power game pretty much down pat. He's decent defensively, pretty versatile. Like, what do you think, Sasha? Is 52 good for him, or?
No, 50 is about right. Depending if you are, in against his skating more than others, if you think that's going to hinder him, but definitely a decent player in puck battles. Against the wall, down low in the offensive zone, he's quite efficient. Like you said, he finds guys. I don't know how he does it. Like, I'm still writing down every time, and you scan more, but then it's like, oh, he found that guy. So it's like you said, what he sees in front of him, he applies well. The biggest thing for me is how he's going to translate in higher levels. Is it going to translate? I guess we'll have to see. But I think his floor could be AHL All-Star type thing, or an AHL player. And then if he really finds his game, I mean, he could be a middle six, forechecking, hard-nosed type of forward. So
for sure,
he's improved this play a tiny bit, but I would say that Bouillard definitely jumped him. But Mossé is a second-round talent. Just where he falls is really dependent on the team that he falls to, because I do think he needs a specific group of guys around him to really make him pop at the NHL.
For sure. And that leaves us with three Europeans that I think need to go in this range. Stian Solberg, Simon Zetter, Matvei Shuravin. Where do we stand on those?
Yes, they are very, very much in this range.
Yeah.
Sure. Simon Zetter kind of worries me. I saw a bit of his SHL tape, and I see a really good defensive forward, but he doesn't do a lot with the advantages he creates. It's one thing to strip the puck, but then you need to do something with it, and usually that results in a turnover or him just getting help from a teammate to carry the puck afterwards.
For sure.
I mean, he is the most profiled SHL player of this draft, and he is a 6'3" center projectable. So I don't hate it, but I probably put Shiravin at the very least above him.
Where do we stand on
Yeah.
Solberg? Does he go soon or?
I would put Solberg over Shiravin. I watched a game of Shiravin yesterday at KHL tape, and there's some really interesting things with him. Like, he's really intelligent. He's learning to use his size a lot better than he was earlier this season. But the transition play is like hilariously
it's
struggle.
awful.
Like the metrics also reflect that, but like in the viewings, it's just like every attempted breakout just goes awry, and that's true in both the MHL and the KHL, which is certainly an issue, especially for modern NHL defenseman projection, which would make me comfortable slipping him a little bit further. But like this is certainly the range. Graham, what's your take on Shiravin?
That's pretty much exactly what I was going to say. His transition game really scares me, especially because I don't think there's really much offensive upside there. So you're really looking at a really defensive defenseman and one that can't get the puck out of his own zone, which is not really a great combination. So I'd be comfortable moving him further down.
For sure. We also have another issue here because, I mean, Matvei Gredin we haven't talked about yet. We haven't talked about any goaltenders yet, and I think Ryerson Leanders needs to get in this talk. And I know, Colin, you're smirking. Let's have this conversation right now because, like, you're a big fan of Carter George. I'm a big fan of Leanders. What do you see in George's game that makes you kind of favor him over Leanders so far?
Well, yeah, I was about to speak up, actually. I think this is the range that both of them should go. I am a big fan of Leanders as well. I will say, I want to say that so I don't come off as kind of a Leanders hater here. He's very athletic goalie, explosive, makes a lot of saves that kind of make you say, wow. But that is kind of my issue between them as well. In George, I see a guy who keeps the play in front of him a bit more, bites a bit less on the shooter. And when we're talking about progressions to higher levels of hockey, it's just something that I would have a bit more confidence in. Where there is such a fine line between these guys, in my eyes anyway. I think they have very similar ceilings, and I think the floor for Leanders might just be a little bit lower than George. It's really as simple as that for me.
Makes sense. Yeah, the thing I see with Leanders that really makes me kind of sold on his upside is like, I mean, he's a player who consistently keeps track of the puck. Like he'll bite hard on shooters, but you will never beat him from the point. Like he's not a player who will get surprised by a shot. His vision's really good, and also his rebound control is ridiculous. Like when he gets a glove or a blocker on a shot, like even with the pads, he's able to consistently throw it in areas for his teammates to pick up. So like, you know, beyond that, he's a player who just understands the game really well and keeps a mental note of like, oh, do I have a trailer, you know, behind my back? Is there someone at the back door? Like, he's a pretty aware goaltender. With Carter George, I see a bit more of an aggressive goaltender, a player who, you know, is able to keep the play in front of him, but I've never seen a goalie like puck play as much as Carter George. Like he'll leave his crease every chance he gets. I've seen him try and succeed at stick handling through a full. Like he's really aggressive with it. I just think like he gives me Mike Smith vibes like way too much, and I'm not really a fan of that profile of goalie. But yeah, I'm not against it. Like if you want, we can put him back to back. Like
I want to throw another hat in the ring. What about Emil Vinny?
Yep, that's a guy that I've been a fan of. If you want to talk about a split between a first and second half of the season, go look at his splits. I think he was about an 850 in Mestis for the first 10 games of the year, and now he's up around 900. I don't think he's been below 900. It's been very infrequent over the last 15 games. If you want to talk about Mike Smith vibes, that's the guy that I would more point to. I think George is more in control and compact in his movements than Mike Smith ever was. Whereas Vinny, I mean, very dynamic, explosive goalie, side to side, very quickly, has a lot of traits that you would look for in a higher ceiling goaltender, but he also gets beat from the point a lot, gets beat through the body a lot. So he's a guy that these are my 1, 2, 3 guys. I'm a fan of all 3 of them, but I would go George, Leenders, and Vinny in that order. However, it seems, Hadi, that you're more passionate about Leenders. I'm happy to give him the bump, and we can go back to back if you'd like.
I'm fine with either way. I just think there's like for me, there's a gap, but like, I mean, it's tough. I would put him back to back. I'd be okay with George and Leenders. It's not as big as a gap as I previously thought it was, but like we need to slot them in here. But do you see Vinny as like a bona fide second rounder, or is he a guy you'd put in your HMs? Okay,
he's HM for me.
For sure.
All right,
so we'll go
perfect.
55-56. That's
now I think like Simon Zetter would be in the conversation.
sure.
I think Camille Bednarik is certainly in the conversation now as well. Like David, like I know you're a big fan. Like I'm happy slotting Bednarik in here. Like he's an all rounder. Does a lot of things very well, which I think is partly why me and Hadi are slightly more skeptical on his front than you are. But he is certainly a second round talent, and he's been outperforming Cole Eiserman in multiple games that I've caught on that line.
You know, it's kind of funny. I kind of feel bad that he's had to have him on his wing for so many years. It makes his job harder. And Bednarik is a very, very interesting player to me just because of how strong he is. And he has a lot of different pathways in which his development can go. If he tries to work on his hands, he can be a dynamic offensive force. If he focuses on shoring up his defensive game, he can become a shutdown center. It's all about who picks him and what they want to do with him. And I think that kind of flexibility gives him a lot of leeway in my books. He's also a very strong skater. Like he is just like pure strength center. And I think that's valuable. That's a valuable profile.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we need to plug in Matthew Reed in here. I think this is the lowest I'm comfortable with.
Yeah. That sounds good to me. And I think we're getting to the range, like we're getting into the last couple picks for our top 64 here. So now is kind of the time where if you guys have players that you're just very bullish on that you want to have in this range, now would be the time to speak up. Like I think my guy that I wouldn't mind slotting in towards the back end here is actually a USA-based prospect and Luke Osborne. Super crazy intelligent. Okay, awesome, great. Like I think Osborne's the guy.
I'm down.
I'm a fan, but I know that there's some other players whose ranges certainly go up into the top 64 that we haven't slotted in just yet. Atos Koivu would be one, so I'd love to hear what you say about him. Yegor Surin, I mean Graham, I know you're a fan of him as well. Now's the time to talk if you have like some late rounders. I know like Ben Danford would be maybe an OHL option in here. Who else?
That's
if
true.
You're going to use if you're going to use your HM on Luke Osborne, I can give you your round of support, and I can use mine on Max Plant. Definitely one of the more dynamic playmakers that I think are left at this point. This guy has problems with his feet. He's not the fastest skater, but he can move pucks up ice like very few in this draft. And he is a lot of the reason why Cole Eiserman is scoring as much as he does. Max Plant finds him wherever he is on the ice. He has a very, very underrated shot as well. If his feet can just get up to like a passable rating, he is a dunk top 6 forward. It's a lot to ask for, and there are concerns, I suppose, with his intelligence. I think sometimes he just knows that Cole Eiserman is that number one option, and he's just gonna be like, I just have to get him the puck. He can do the rest.
Oh, we have a big problem.
Who did we forget?
Jet Lachenko.
Oh yes, that's another one.
Is that a big problem?
Yeah.
Jordan, what's your take on Lachenko?
I have okay. I wrote him in. I wrote him down as like earlier than I really probably should have. I think I was just watching like a really good game and I kind of got a little bit excited. But I think he probably belongs in the back half of the second round.
For sure.
So which is kind of where we are right now. I think the 3 from the OHL that I would be okay. You know, even if we excluded some, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Would be Danford, Luchenko, and Van Acker. But I would say probably Danford and Luchenko are my higher than Van Acker for sure. There's a bit of a gap between that. Yeah.
No Sam
We'll
O'Reilly?
get Luchenko ranked.
He's in the same. It's Danford, or pardon me, it's Luchenko, Danford, Van Acker, Sam O'Reilly.
Yeah, I definitely like Luchenko as like a 50 to 55 player. Like I would find a way to plug him in there. I've been watching a bit more of him recently, and like a lot of the things you'll like about Luke Misa, he's got maybe less pace, but he's such
Luke Misa light. That's what I call him. Yeah, young Luke Misa.
He's such
We
a
could slot him-
projectable player.
We could slot him in like ahead of like Maxime Massé maybe, or ahead of Adam Yeko. Like that feels like the range, right?
Between those two, yeah, I'd say
Between those two?
Massé, Luchenko, Yeko. I'm comfortable with.
It doesn't matter
feel
too
Luchenko's
much
the
to me,
top,
but
yeah.
as long as they get on, as long as he gets on the board there, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There we go. So put him in there. I think Sam O'Reilly is definitely like a player I would look at here as one of the last picks of the second. Like he is a really intelligent, really aware player. He reminds me a lot of like a slower Owen Beck. Like he's really intelligent with it, always hitting the right spots, and compensates for his lack of like pure pace and speed with really, really smart positioning. Like his positioning is really, really solid. So I think that, keeping him out of the top 64 would be a mistake. I think he's definitely got that skill level. And also, as much as I've soured on him recently, I think dropping Will Scahan anywhere lower than this, I'm kind of, I'm not really comfy with. But like, there's a lot of players.
We have
consider here.
options.
Yeah,
right.
That's the issue.
Like Julius Miettinen would be one. Again, Luke Osborne, I would really quite like to have inside the top 64 as one of the final players, especially if David's also enthusiastic about that.
Me too. Yeah.
Mietinen's
That
more
was
of an
Chloe?
HM for me personally, but
Okay. That's a great fit then, because like we have 2 more slots in our top 64 and we have a lot of HMs open. So Annie, would you be comfortable having Koivu as an HM? Because I know that you're a fan of his intelligence, the skating, and the shooting ability there.
Yeah, I could have him as an HM. Late second, early third is what I see his range. So he as an HM is okay for me.
Perfect. All right. So we'll slot Koivu in as an HM. Same thing with Julius Miettinen, who is a pretty fun like power forward style player in the WHL. Is there any counter argument to Luke Osborne in here? Because I know Hadi, you're a little bit more skeptical than me and David are, but the brain is just like the tools are certainly still coming along, but he's one of the youngest players in the draft class and one of the smartest players in the draft class, and that's a combination that I like a lot. For
sure. The only thing is, I like to see players with this kind of profile have at least one thing they can do really, really well. I mean, obviously, Luke Osborne thinks the game at an advanced level, but I'm talking about pure tools. Like, can he shoot the puck at an NHL level? Can he develop his playmaking? Like, does he have flashes of playmaking that can develop into something really interesting?
I've seen flashes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Likewise.
I guess, but like, I don't see it as kind of like top 4 type, level skill. Like, I see it as something that he can develop to a point where he's able to make passes at an NHL level, but I don't see that game-breaking passing ability, or at least I haven't in the like 3 or 4 games I've caught of his, where like, I don't know, like I'm okay with it. I just think like for me, Sam O'Reilly is a player I'm banging the drum for here. Like I'm a really big fan of his game.
I'd be fine with those being the last 2 players on our board. Like Will Scahan would be the other option, but I think if he's an HM,
I would take Osborne for sure over Scahan.
I'm fine with that.
All right, perfect. So if we do
Surin, maybe.
I'm a bit more skeptical there, but Graham, I know that you're a bit of a bigger fan than I am with him.
I don't know. I mean, I've kind of soured on him recently too. I had him ranked perhaps a little bit higher than I would rank him today, partially just to have him as part of the conversation. But I think there's IQ issues there that are a little concerning for me. So I'm totally comfortable not having it.
We need to add Luke Osborne to our list though. He's not in there, so that's a whole thing. But yeah, I think that's more or less the names that I think, unless there's objections, players that some of you really, really want in your top 64. If we end things off with O'Reilly and Osborne, like, are there any objections at all, or?
Does not sound like it. Awesome. That sounds great then.
Super.
So we'll do Osborne and Sam O'Reilly to wrap up the top 64, which leaves us now with the fun part, the honorable mentions, where we don't have to debate with anyone. We can just put in the players that we like. So are there please, the floor is yours, everyone. For players that might be just guys that you've been really big fans of over the course of the season, but who maybe have some projectability concerns, but whose names you want to kind of get written down at the very least to give them a shout out. Now is the time for that.
Max Plant's going to be mine. I'm putting that down.
Okay, everybody's taking my HMs. I'm digging into the barrel here.
I got two guys in the queue that I could probably fit in here. Marcus Kersey. Watched a bit of him lately. I want to see where he goes from this point on. Kind of late bloomer type guy. And personally, just one of my favorites, the short king, Justin Poirier, just because he shoots the lights out. Yeah. I want to see if he can figure out the rest of the game, because he's not a pushover by any means. He's quite thick, and he's 5'8", 5'7", but 180 plus pounds. So he does have that DeBrincat type of mold where he can actually win puck battles, and he's not useless physically. So if he can figure out other parts of his game, it could be quite interesting as a flyer.
Yeah, I'll also go with Gabe Frasca, who I've really liked recently. He's been pretty interesting recently, so I'll put him down here as my HM as well. He the first time I ranked him, he had come back from injury maybe 4 or 5 days before my rankings came out. But having watched him over the past month or two, it's so clear that there's an NHLer here. He's got a really good foundation habits. He's really good at moving off the puck and finding little pockets to shoot from. The skating, I don't know yet. I mean, he's back from injury, so that might be part of it, but the skating is an issue. But overall, I think the awareness, the decision-making, the habits, all that's there. So for me, definitely HM. I think we go 2 per person. That'll be fine, right?
We can go 2 per person. I think we're all pretty familiar with our ranges at this point in our regions that we can give a decent amount of shout outs. I think the first one that I would highlight for the European players would be Melvin Fernstrom. He is a pretty good shooter. His transition play is a bit of a concern in my viewings. He can try to do a little bit too much and just turn the puck over rather easily. And there's some IQ questions there, but the offensive tools are really intriguing. Very good puck handler, really good shot. At the very least for an HM, I can see the hype there.
I watched a game of him too, and he was Swedish Cole Iserman to me.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Yeah, stylistically, they both love to shoot the puck. They both do not support play very well in transition, and
they both rack up goals.
They rack up goals. The J20 production for Fernstrom is very impressive. I think we have some Finnish players that are also kind of in this range, like Topias Hynninen. Not sure what you think of him, Annie, but I've liked the intensity, especially in Liga play, where he's not exactly a very active offensive player, but he really brings a lot of energy and does a lot of the dirty work for his line mates.
Yeah, he's got a really good motor, and I feel like he's been playing really good hockey in the bottom 6 role. The issue I have with him is that when I watch Jukurit games, I tend to forget he's playing. But when I really focus on him, he's doing his job well. So that's a good name to bring up.
I like him
sure.
Too. Yeah, definitely.
How do you feel about him versus Sebastian Sweeney?
I like Sweeney too, because he's more of a defenseman, but I think he's really excellent at moving the puck under pressure. He's really composed, and I think he's played really good games in the Mestis. So
for sure. Would you prefer him to?
Well, before I saw the advanced stats, I had preferred Soini over Hynninen, but maybe they stats, was it David who sent them, were really impressive. So
Yeah,
maybe now I have to say Hyninen over Soini.
for sure. Okay.
Yeah. At the very least, Hyninen could be one of my honorable mentions, right? Like if you want to save yours for Soini, I can keep mine for Hyninen. Like I think like Fernstrom and Hyninen are both limited and flawed in their own ways, but certainly interesting enough to get an HM. Beyond that, like we have some interesting names that we haven't talked at all about yet, and for I think clear reasons. Like Anthony Cristoforo is a player I know that Jordan has a lot of issues with, and probably won't be an HM as a result. But
No,
the
there's a couple guys
production
that
in
pick
this,
over him.
yeah, okay. Like who's left in the OHL that's intriguing to you as an HM?
Like this guy is like all on projection because I don't think he's a good player right now, but like there's so much there is Lucas Fisher.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
6'4", like he's Yuri Fisher's son. If you guys remember him. So his dad was like 6'6". I think his brother's like 6'7" or something like that.
Big family.
He's big, skates well, physical. I just don't think he realizes that he's huge and could just like dominate, but that's the thing. Anyways, there's a lot to like, but he's just nowhere near ready yet. But like he's too big, too strong, and too good of a skater to not be a much better player than he is.
Yeah, I was gonna say he completely skipped my mind. He's a player that could definitely have made the top 64. Like
I think
would've been
if
fine
he
with it.
picks it up, like he could definitely go higher. Like there's a ton of like things that are pro quality, just about his physical profile.
For sure. Yeah, we'll leave it as an HM for the moment, but we'll both keep a close eye on him as the season goes on and kind of see where he goes from there.
Yeah.
So there we go.
I got one more I can posit in here. Noel Franzen was, to me, very impressive. Reminded me a lot of the underrated skating type defenseman that we've seen a lot of recently. Think Jordan Harris, Giannis Moser, that kind of mold. Big fan of his game. He's able to make some really dynamic plays too, and he's seen like basically zero attention, and I think that's a bit of a crime. He does a lot right, and definitely one of the more underrated options in this year's draft.
For sure. I think we'll put him in. That leaves us, I think, with 3 HMs left to get to 80 players in our.
That would be the comfortable
Yeah.
cap. Like we're still like Tomanov was another guy that like I haven't watched much, but
I'd steer clear of him personally.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not a
Alright.
big fan. Wait, what just happened?
I went Z to A. Sorry.
Oh,
No worries.
Screwed me up.
Okay, we're good. Tomova Lavo, I'm not a fan of. Marek
is
Van
there
Acker,
anyone
I'm
that-
guessing, is going to be yours, Jordan, right?
Yeah, for sure. He's I definitely don't think he's top 64, but he's definitely an HM for me, even though I guess
sure.
my rank.
How do we feel about Frankie Morelli? Yeah.
or Luca Morelli, both
Luca Morelli, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, he's not an HM for me. He's more of a 4th round guy.
Okay.
All
I'll work
right.
with
Is
that.
there any other player that somebody's enthusiastic about as an HM? Because if not, this seems like a very natural place to kind of wrap up.
Yeah,
I got. Well, I don't want to say Will Zellers simply because I haven't watched him. He had a really great Hlinka tournament, and I haven't had tape of him since. So, if there's somebody
I've watched
that
a couple games. Yeah, he's
okay.
He's okay.
He scores a lot, but it's prep league, so it's hard to make a conclusion of him.
Yeah.
If there's somebody I will posit here from the NTDP would be Brendan McMorrow. Definitely a very, very interesting guy. He has been in and out of their top 6, and I just see him as an ill-shapen tool in their system. This guy should be playing a shutdown line somewhere and being the one that drives possession for said line. He's a great skater, fantastically strong, and with some really underrated playmaking chops that hasn't gotten him the attention he might deserve. But the NTDP in their current structure is all about pushing offense through, and that's not really his game. But I mean, as a bottom 6 checking forward, I think he's very, very projectable just because of how fast and how strong he is.
For sure.
Awesome.
Luke, do you want
Luke,
to
yeah.
have Carson Wetch in yours? Is that a player you feel comfortable with? Or?
I'm not in love with Carson Wetch. I think that there's other probably other people around that I think other people in this group would be more enthusiastic about than I am about Carson Wetch. This is another guy I would say, maybe I don't think I'm confident enough to say that he's an honorable mention, but definitely a guy to keep an eye on is Gavin Hodnett on the Edmonton Oil Kings, a guy who is very, very quietly in the top 50 in WHL scorers, right in line with guys like Tanner Howe, Miguel Marcus, and how much they're putting up a game. But the caveat is he is very, very 5'8". He's a small guy and much more of a playmaker than a shooter. But he's also his second full season in the WHL, third season if you count the 5-game cup of coffee he had in 2022. He's a guy who's interesting to me, a guy I'd watch, but I don't think that there's other guys outside of the WHL right now that I'd really push for besides Miettinen, who I think is interesting. He's big, wins a lot of puck battles, and does a good job of finding space in the middle of the ice and finding people in the middle of the ice, and is ended up in a very nice role in terms of being the net front guy on Everett's power play. But besides Miettinen, I don't think that there's really other guys that I would push for in this honorable mention kind of area.
Okay, for sure. That'll leave someone else to pick up a third. I mean, Emil Vinny's already in there for Colin. Is there any other goalies you might put in your HMs or not at all?
I mean, I can put one in there if you're begging for it, but there is a bit of a tier break for me after Vinny, so I wouldn't be pushing for it, no. No
worries. Anyone else have a guy they want to push for? Like, I know David, you're a big fan of Landon Resendez.
I don't know about him in this range. I mean, he's out of my top 32 for the region for the time being, but there's a lot to like with his game just because he's a little ball of violence. I don't know about NHL translatability for him, and I don't even know about a draft pick to come June, but he does a lot of fun things, and hockey deserves a little romance. For what he's worth, he lands in that range for me.
For sure.
One guy I'll
one other
bring
player
up.
Yeah.
Herman Traff is a 6'3" winger from Sweden. Really quite interesting. He has a decent level of puck skills, decent shooter. Definitely leans shot off the rush compared to passing, but I've liked his defensive impact. He's pretty rangy, uses his stick quite well to break up plays. And David, what was your take on Herman Traff?
Yeah, he kind of isn't up to the pace of the SHL just yet.
For sure,
but I mean, I don't see much out of him yet to like have a strong opinion on him either way. He plays defensively, he can move the pucks, and he's not afraid of playing puck battles in the corners. If I see him in the NHL anywhere, it'll be by like being a pure power forward who just runs into the boards and gets pucks to the middle, which is it's a bit of a rarity in this draft. So I can see the honorable mention validity, simply because not a lot of people does what Herman Traff does. So there's value to that. I mean, for sure, I can see it.
Perfect. Well, that's 80 players. That wraps things up. After we're done here, please review the list, and if there's any discrepancies between where you put players and where they're ranked, like I know we circled back on some players and remembered some players that we had forgotten. So please take the time if you can to just like kind of check things out, make sure that if there's a player that's way too low for your liking, let us know. We'll kind of work it out in the Discord channel afterwards.
For sure. But yeah, like this wraps it up for the meeting. So thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. And yeah, we'll be back with another meeting in a couple months' time.